fields of Calhoun County, Georgia, stretched out like a patchwork quilt under the golden light of an autumn afternoon in 1857. These were the lands of prosperity, where cotton bloomed white as clouds, and the promise of fortune beckoned men with ambition in their hearts. Among these men was Thomas Harker, who had arrived from Charleston 5 years prior with his young wife, Eleanor, and their firstborn son. Thomas Harker was not born to wealth, but his hands were strong, his mind sharp, and his determination unyielding. He had purchased a modest parcel on the outskirts of Woodbury, a plot others had deemed too close to Whispering Creek and its surrounding forests to be desirable. The locals spoke of strange occurrences near those woods, livestock gone missing, unusual sounds carried on the night breeze, and an unsettling feeling that seemed to seep from between the ancient oaks like morning mist. But Thomas Harker was not a man to heed superstition. The land was fertile, the price was right, and he had 7 mouths to feed. His beautiful children, each with Eleanor's soft brown eyes and his own stubborn chin. By 1857, the Harker homestead had grown into a respectable farm with a 2-story clapboard house painted white, a sturdy barn, and fields that yielded enough cotton and corn to keep the family comfortable, if not wealthy. The Harkers were known in Woodbury as private but decent folk. They attended Sunday service at the white wooden church in town, though they rarely lingered for the social gatherings that followed. Eleanor, with her quiet dignity, would smile politely but speak little, while Thomas would exchange necessary pleasantries before ushering his brood back to their wagon for the journey home. The 7 Harker children were a curiosity in themselves. They were remarkably well-behaved, never running wild through town like other children their age. They moved with an unusual grace, spoke when spoken to in voices soft as whispers, and had an unnerving habit of staring without blinking for uncomfortable lengths of time. From eldest to youngest, they were William, age 12, who carried himself like a man grown. Twins Mary and Martha, age 10, identical in every way, save for a small birthmark behind Martha's right ear. James, age 8, with a serious demeanor that seemed beyond his years. Catherine, age 6, whose laugh on the rare occasions it was heard reminded listeners of silver bells. Young Thomas Jr., age 4, who had never been known to cry, and baby Elizabeth, just 2 years old, with golden curls that caught the sunlight like a halo. Dr. Josiah Miller, the town's only physician, had attended each birth save for William's. He often remarked to his wife that the Harker children were uncommonly healthy. Never a case of croup or scarlet fever among them, not even the usual childhood ailments that kept him busy visiting other families throughout the county. Those children, he would say, sipping his evening brandy by the fire, are either blessed by God or... He never finished the thought aloud. But his wife noticed how he would cross himself when the Harker name arose in conversation. The events that would transform the Harker family from a local curiosity to an enduring mystery began in the late summer of 1857, when the cotton stood tall and the air hung heavy with heat and the promise of autumn rains. It started with the disappearance of the Wilkins boy Samuel, age 14, who vanished while fishing at Whispering Creek, less than a mile from the Harker property. The search parties combed the woods for 3 days before finding his fishing pole abandoned on the creek bank, a half-strung line beside it, and a set of footprints that led into the water and mysteriously did not emerge on the other side. Thomas Harker had joined the search, as had most able-bodied men in the county. He had returned home each evening, grim-faced and silent, retreating to his study, where Eleanor would bring him a tray of food that often remained untouched until morning. Following young Samuel's disappearance, strange occurrences began to plague Woodbury. Livestock went missing at an alarming rate, not killed as by wolves or wild cats, with blood and remains to mark their passing, but simply gone, as if they had walked away of their own accord. Gardens withered overnight, the plants turning black as if touched by frost, though the August heat remained unbroken. And there were the sounds, distant, haunting melodies that seemed to ride the night wind, reminiscent of children's nursery rhymes, but played in discordant keys that raised the hairs on the back of one's neck. Sheriff Daniel Bishop, a veteran of the Mexican-American War and not a man given to flights of fancy, found himself making increasingly frequent rides out to the remote parts of the county. Complaints came in daily, sightings of figures at the edge of properties, pale faces peering from between trees at dusk, small footprints in freshly turned soil where no child had been. "It's those woods," muttered Joseph Carter, the blacksmith, as men gathered at Griffin's general store to discuss the strange happenings. "They've always been wrong somehow. My granddaddy used to say the Indians wouldn't go near them, called it a thin place where the veil between worlds could be torn." "Nonsense," replied Elijah Griffin, though he glanced nervously out his shop window toward the distant tree-line. "It's likely nothing more than some runaway slaves hiding out, or perhaps a gang of thieves passing through." But even as he spoke, a chill breeze swept through the open door, causing the lantern flames to dance and sputter, though the day outside remained hot and still. It was Eleanor Harker who first noticed the change in her children. Always quiet and well-mannered, they grew even more withdrawn as August gave way to September. They would speak only when directly addressed, and even then, in hushed tones that forced her to lean close to hear their replies. They took to sitting for hours on the covered porch that wrapped around the front of the house, 7 small figures arranged in a perfect line, their eyes fixed on the edge of the forest beyond their fields. At night, Eleanor would wake to find their beds empty, only to discover all 7 standing at various windows throughout the house, their nightshirts ghostly white in the darkness, their breath fogging the glass as they stared out into the night. "They're listening," William had said when she questioned him one morning, his voice flat and emotionless. "They're calling us home." When she asked who was calling, he merely smiled, a strange, knowing smile that did not reach his eyes, and returned to his breakfast as if nothing unusual had been said. Thomas dismissed his wife's concerns. The children were simply reacting to the tension in the community, he insisted. The talk of missing livestock and strange sounds had likely reached their ears, despite his and Eleanor's efforts to shield them from such matters. Once the mysterious events passed, the children would return to their normal selves. But Thomas himself had begun to show signs of strain. Dark circles appeared beneath his eyes. His once robust frame grew leaner, and he developed a persistent cough that seemed to worsen at night. Eleanor would often find him at his desk, fallen asleep over his ledgers, mumbling in his slumber words she could not quite make out, but that left her feeling uneasy nonetheless. On Sunday, September 20th, 1857, the Harker family failed to appear at church service for the first time since their arrival in Woodbury. Reverend Howard Phillips, concerned by their absence, rode out to their property that afternoon. What he found, or rather what he didn't find, would become the first page in a mystery that would haunt Calhoun County for decades to come. The Harker home stood silent, the front door swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, the table was set for breakfast, 8 plates, 8 cups, the food upon them untouched and beginning to spoil. There were no signs of struggle, no indications of violence or forced entry. Personal belongings remained in place, Eleanor's silver hairbrush on her dressing table, Thomas's pocket watch on his bedside stand, the children's toys and books arranged neatly on shelves and in trunks. But of the Harker family themselves, there was no trace. Sheriff Bishop organized a search immediately. Men from Woodbury and surrounding farms combed every inch of the Harker property, then expanded to the neighboring woods and creek. Tracking dogs were brought in from Albany, but they behaved strangely, whining and pulling at their leads, refusing to enter certain areas of the forest, no matter how their handlers urged them forward. Days turned to weeks with no sign of the missing family. The community, already on edge from the earlier disturbances, fell into a state of collective dread. Families began to leave, selling their properties at losses or simply abandoning them outright. By Christmas of that year, Woodbury's population had dwindled by nearly a third. Those who remained spoke in hushed tones of what might have befallen the Harkers. Some suggested they had fled in the night, perhaps due to mounting debts or some scandal unknown to their neighbors. Others whispered of more sinister possibilities. Murder-suicide driven by madness or an attack by the same phantom forces that had caused the other strange occurrences in the county. As winter settled over Georgia, the search for the Harker family officially ended. Their property remained untouched, as no relatives came forward to claim it, and no one in Woodbury wished to purchase land now widely regarded as cursed. The house stood empty, gradually surrendering to the elements, shutters hanging askew, paint peeling from clapboards, the once tended gardens overrun with weeds, and there the matter might have rested, another tragic mystery consigned to local legend, had it not been for the events that transpired 5 years later in the autumn of 1862. The war between the states was by then in full terrible swing. Georgia had not yet felt the full devastation that would come with Sherman's march to the sea, but the conflict had touched every community nonetheless. Young men had marched away to battle, many never to return. Resources grew scarce, and the rhythms of daily life had been irrevocably altered. Woodbury, like countless small southern towns, struggled to maintain some semblance of normalcy amid the chaos of war. The population had stabilized somewhat after the exodus following the Harker disappearance, though the town never quite returned to its former prosperity. Dr. Josiah Miller, now gray-haired and stooped with age, continued his practice despite the shortage of medicines and equipment. His rounds frequently took him to outlying farms, where the women, children, and elderly men left behind struggled to maintain their properties while their able-bodied men fought far from home. It was on one such journey, returning from attending a difficult birth at the Johnson farm some 15 miles from town, that Dr. Miller's horse threw a shoe. The mishap occurred as dusk was falling, and the doctor found himself on foot, leading his limping mare along a seldom-used road that skirted the edge of the forest near what had once been the Harker property. As twilight deepened into true darkness, Dr. Miller realized he would not reach town before night fell completely. Remembering the abandoned Harker house stood not far off the road, he decided to seek shelter there until morning rather than risk injury to himself or his horse by continuing in the darkness. The old house loomed against the night sky, its windows black and empty, its porch sagging like a tired mouth. 5 years of abandonment had taken their toll, yet the structure remained fundamentally sound. Dr. Miller tethered his horse to a post, removed his medical bag from the saddle, and cautiously approached the front door, which hung partially open on rusted hinges. The interior was thick with dust and cobwebs. Furniture remained in place, draped in sheets that had once been white but now bore the gray-brown patina of neglect. Using a lucifer from his pocket, Dr. Miller lit a stub of candle he carried in his bag for emergencies. The small flame cast grotesque shadows on the walls as he made his way through the downstairs rooms, looking for a suitable place to pass the night. In what had been the parlor, he found a chaise longue that appeared relatively intact. Deciding this would serve as his bed, he set his bag down and was about to settle in when a sound from upstairs froze him in place. It was the unmistakable creak of a floorboard, as if beneath a footstep. "Hello," he called, his voice sounding thin and reedy in the empty house. "Is someone there?" No answer came, but as he stood straining his ears, another sound reached him, a soft, rhythmic creaking, like that of a rocking chair in motion. Common sense dictated that Dr. Miller should have fled the house immediately, but he was a man of science, a physician who had faced death and disease without flinching. And perhaps, he would later admit, there was a certain fatigue in his old bones that made the prospect of returning to the dark road less appealing than investigating the source of the sounds. Candle held high, he ascended the staircase, wincing at each groan of the old wood beneath his feet. The upper hallway stretched before him, doors to bedrooms standing open like a row of black mouths. The creaking sound continued, coming from the last room on the right, what he recalled as having been the nursery during his few visits to the house in happier days. "I am Dr. Miller from Woodbury," he announced, moving slowly toward the sound. "I mean no harm. I merely seek shelter for the night." The creaking stopped abruptly. Silence fell, heavy and complete, broken only by the doctor's own breathing and the distant hoot of an owl outside. Dr. Miller paused outside the nursery door, holding the candle at shoulder height. Its light spilled into the room, illuminating what should have been an empty space, and instead revealed a sight that would haunt him until his dying day. 7 small figures sat or lay around the room, arranged as if in the midst of ordinary children's activities. The Harker children, William, Mary, Martha, James, Catherine, Thomas Jr., and little Elizabeth, exactly as they had been 5 years earlier, not a day older, not a single visible change in their appearance. William sat in the rocking chair that had been the source of the creaking, a book open on his lap. The twins, Mary and Martha, were seated on the floor with a set of paper dolls between them. James stood by the window looking out into the night. Catherine sat on a small chair, a porcelain doll clutched to her chest. Thomas Jr. played with wooden blocks on a faded rug, and baby Elizabeth, still as infant-like as she had been at 2 years old, lay in a small trundle bed, her golden curls spread across the pillow. As the light fell upon them, 7 pairs of eyes turned to Dr. Miller. 7 faces, pale as milk, regarded him without expression. 7 mouths opened simultaneously, though no sound emerged. Dr. Miller's medical bag slipped from nerveless fingers. The candle wavered in his grasp as tremors seized his hand. "Children," he managed to whisper, "where have you been? Where are your parents?" William closed his book and stood, moving with the same grace Dr. Miller remembered, yet somehow wrong, too fluid, as if his limbs were not quite solid. "We've been here," the boy said, his voice carrying the same pitch and timbre it had 5 years ago, though there was an underlying hollow quality to it, like words spoken into an empty barrel. "We've always been here. Father and Mother went into the woods." The other children nodded in unison, their movements unnaturally synchronized. "They'll be back soon," said Mary, or perhaps Martha, for even as twins, they had been nearly impossible to tell apart. "They told us to wait," added the other twin. "And we're very good at waiting," said James, turning away from the window. Dr. Miller took an involuntary step backward, his medical training warring with the primal fear that gripped him. These children should have aged. William should be 17 now, the twins 15, James 13, Catherine 11, Thomas Jr. 9, and little Elizabeth 7. Yet here they sat, exactly as they had been, frozen in time like insects in amber. And there was something else, something his physician's eye caught despite his terror. They were not breathing. Their chests did not rise and fall. Their eyes did not blink. They were utterly, completely still, save when they deliberately moved. Are you well?" he asked, unable to formulate a more appropriate question in the face of this impossibility. "We're waiting," Catherine said, her voice like wind through dried leaves. "Waiting for what?" Dr. Miller pressed, even as he took another step back into the hallway. All 7 children answered in perfect unison, "For you to join us." The sound of their combined voices, flat, emotionless, yet somehow carrying an undercurrent of ancient hunger, broke the spell of horrified fascination that had held Dr. Miller in place. He turned and fled down the hallway, taking the stairs 2 at a time despite the protest of his aged knees. Behind him came the sound of small feet, unhurried yet inexorable, descending the staircase. Dr. Miller burst through the front door, untied his frightened horse with fumbling fingers, and managed to mount despite the animal's nervous dancing. As he urged the mare forward, he glanced back at the house. 7 small figures stood on the porch in a perfect row, their faces pale ovals in the moonlight. As one, they raised their right hands in farewell. The doctor did not stop until he reached Woodbury, his horse lathered and his own heart pounding fit to burst. He went directly to Sheriff Bishop's house, pounding on the door until the lawman appeared, pistol in hand. "The Harker children," gasped Dr. Miller, nearly falling as he dismounted. There in the house, all 7 of them, unchanged, Unaged. Sheriff Bishop, who had been part of the original search 5 years earlier, regarded the doctor with concern. "Josiah, you're overwrought. Come inside, have a drink, and tell me calmly what you believe you saw." But Dr. Miller would not be placated. He insisted on gathering a party to return to the Harker house immediately, warning that the children might vanish again if they delayed. Eventually, the sheriff relented, rousing several men from their beds, including Reverend Phillips and Elijah Griffin. The small party arrived at the abandoned Harker property just as dawn was breaking. The house stood silent in the gray light, looking every bit as deserted as it had for the past 5 years. "They were here," insisted Dr. Miller, leading the way up the porch steps. "In the nursery upstairs. All 7 of them exactly as they were the day they disappeared." The men moved cautiously through the house, dust swirling around their boots, cobwebs clinging to their hats and coats. They found the doctor's medical bag where he had dropped it at the foot of the stairs and the stub of candle, now extinguished, on the floor of the upstairs hallway. But the nursery, when they entered it, was empty. The rocking chair stood motionless. There were no paper dolls, no books, no wooden blocks. The trundle bed held only a moldering mattress, no golden-haired child. "Josiah," said Reverend Phillips gently, "there's nothing here." The doctor moved frantically around the room, pointing out where each child had been. "William was here in this chair. The twins were on the floor there, James by the window. They spoke to me. They said their parents had gone into the woods." Sheriff Bishop placed a hand on the agitated physician's shoulder. "You've been working too hard, old friend. The war has us all at our limits. Perhaps what you saw was a dream or a vision brought on by exhaustion." But as the men turned to leave the nursery, Elijah Griffin noticed something on the dusty floor. Small footprints, 7 distinct sets leading from various parts of the room to the door. "What made these?" he asked, pointing. The men fell silent, staring at the unmistakable prints. They were fresh, the dust displaced to reveal the wooden floorboards beneath. "Search the house," ordered Sheriff Bishop, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. They went through every room, every closet, every possible hiding place, but found no trace of the Harker children. As they regrouped in the front parlor, preparing to expand their search to the grounds, a young deputy who had been examining the walls let out a startled exclamation. "Sheriff, look at this." On the parlor wall, written in what appeared to be charcoal at a height that would have been reachable by a child, was a message. "We are still here. We are always here. The woods keep us." The handwriting was childish, the letters uneven and some reversed, as if written by someone just learning to form words. Sheriff Bishop ordered the men outside, his face pale beneath his whiskers. Once on the porch, he turned to them with a grave expression. "Not a word of this in town," he said firmly. "The last thing we need is a panic, especially with the war on. Dr. Miller, you'll stay with me for a few days. You need rest." "But the children," the doctor began. "If there are children," interrupted the sheriff, "we will find them in due course. But I won't have talk of unnatural things spreading through Woodbury. We've had enough trouble since the Harkers disappeared." The men reluctantly agreed to keep silent, though each privately wondered what had truly transpired in the abandoned house and what connection it might have to the strange events that had plagued the area 5 years earlier. Dr. Miller, despite the sheriff's skepticism, was certain of what he had seen. In the days that followed, he made detailed notes of his encounter, including descriptions of each child and every word they had spoken. These notes he sealed in an envelope and left with his will, to be opened upon his death. That death came sooner than anyone expected. 3 weeks after the incident at the Harker house, Dr. Josiah Miller was found in his office, slumped over his desk, a peaceful expression on his face. The coroner ruled it a natural death, heart failure brought on by age and overwork. But those who prepared his body for burial noted something unusual. Clutched in the doctor's right hand was a child's paper doll, crudely fashioned from brown wrapping paper, the kind the Harker twins had been playing with in his account of that night. The sealed envelope containing Dr. Miller's notes was duly opened following the funeral. Its contents caused considerable consternation among the town's leading citizens, particularly when compared with certain other events that had occurred in the intervening weeks. 3 nights after the doctor's visit to the Harker house, the Johnson family, whose farm he had been returning from when his horse threw a shoe, reported seeing 7 small figures at the edge of their property, standing motionless, watching their house from dusk until dawn. When Mr. Johnson fired his shotgun over their heads in warning, they did not flee or even flinch, but simply turned as one and walked into the forest. A week later, the Cooper children, playing near Whispering Creek despite strict parental prohibitions against it, claimed to have encountered a group of strange children who invited them to come see where we live in the woods. The oldest Cooper boy described these children as waxy-looking, like dolls, but walking and talking, and said they spoke in whispers that somehow carried clearly over the sound of the rushing creek. Most disturbing of all, on the night before Dr. Miller's death, a slave from the Richardson plantation, who had been sent on an errand to a neighboring farm and was returning after dark, reported seeing 7 white shapes emerging from the Harker house and moving into the forest in single file. He described them as glowing faintly, like foxfire on a rotten log, and said they appeared to be floating just above the ground rather than walking on it. These accounts, combined with the doctor's detailed notes, painted a picture too strange and too consistent to be dismissed entirely. Sheriff Bishop, pragmatic though he was, ordered that the Harker house be watched from a distance. For 2 weeks, deputies took turns observing the property from a concealed position a quarter-mile away. They reported nothing unusual until the final night of their vigil, when Deputy Samuel Green swore that he saw lights moving within the house. Not the steady glow of lanterns or candles, but faint bluish lights that drifted from room to room like luminous soap bubbles. At approximately midnight, the lights converged at the front of the house, then streamed out the door and across the overgrown fields toward the forest, where they disappeared among the trees. The war soon demanded Sheriff Bishop's full attention, as deserters began to appear in the county, raiding farms for food and supplies. The mystery of the Harker children was officially shelved, though it continued to be discussed in hushed tones around hearth fires and on the porches of Woodbury on summer evenings. The conflict dragged on, bringing with it hardship and sorrow enough to overshadow older mysteries. When news came of General Lee's surrender at Appomattox in April of 1865, the citizens of Woodbury had more immediate concerns than ghosts and inexplicable happenings from years past. The Reconstruction era that followed brought its own trials. Woodbury, like much of the South, struggled to adapt to the profound social and economic changes thrust upon it. The once prosperous community dwindled further as younger residents left to seek opportunities elsewhere, leaving behind an aging population clinging to the remnants of a vanished way of life. The Harker property remained abandoned, gradually reclaimed by nature. Vines crawled up the walls of the house, roots buckled the foundation, and eventually the roof collapsed, leaving the structure open to the elements. By 1877, 20 years after the family's disappearance, little remained but crumbling walls and the stone chimney standing like a monument to forgotten mysteries. It was in that year that a new chapter in the strange saga of the Harker family began. Professor Thaddeus Blackwood of Emory College had developed an interest in what he termed folk phenomena, unusual occurrences reported in rural communities throughout the South. An academic with a background in both natural philosophy and theology, Blackwood approached such matters with scholarly rigor, seeking rational explanations while maintaining an open mind to possibilities beyond current scientific understanding. Having heard rumors of the Harker mystery during a lecture tour, Blackwood traveled to Calhoun County in the summer of 1877 to investigate. He took lodgings in what remained of Woodbury, by then little more than a cluster of buildings around a crossroads, its population reduced to fewer than 300 souls. Among these remaining residents were some who remembered the Harkers and the strange events surrounding their disappearance. Elijah Griffin, now proprietor of the only remaining general store, shared what he knew, including his recollection of the footprints in the dust and the message on the parlor wall. Reverend Phillips, retired but still living in the parsonage beside the church, provided his own account of that morning's exploration of the house. Most valuable to Blackwood's investigation was the journal of Dr. Josiah Miller, preserved by his widow and containing not only his notes from the night of his encounter with the Harker children, but also his observations and theories developed in the weeks before his death. I am convinced, the doctor had written, that what I witnessed was neither hallucination nor supernatural visitation in the common understanding of such terms. The children I saw were physically present, able to move objects and leave impressions in dust. Yet, they were also fundamentally altered from the living children I had known years before. Dr. Miller had gone on to detail his medical observations, the lack of breathing, the unnaturally synchronized movements, the voices that seemed to carry unusual harmonics. His conclusion, though cautiously worded, was startling. I propose that the Harker children exist in a state neither fully alive nor truly dead, but preserved in some manner that medical science cannot yet explain. Their connection to the forest near Whispering Creek suggests the source of this preservation lies therein. What became of Thomas and Ella Harker, I cannot say, though the children's claim that their parents went into the woods may hold the key. Professor Blackwood, armed with these accounts and his own scholarly preparations, determined to visit the ruins of the Harker house and, if possible, the section of forest that seemed central to the mystery. The remains of the house offered little beyond what he had already learned from written and verbal accounts. The professor made detailed sketches of that site and collected samples of soil and plant life growing among the ruins, but found nothing immediately advanced his understanding of what Moses called out in alarm from the edge of the circle. "Professor, look there, through the trees." Following the man's pointing finger, Blackwood glimpsed what seemed to be a small figure watching them from between distant trunks. A child, or what appeared to be a child, with pale skin and dark clothing. As he straightened to get a better look, the figure retreated, seeming to melt into the shadows beneath the trees. "We should go," urged Moses, his voice tense. "Now, while we still can." Blackwood, his scientific curiosity warring with a growing sense of unease, reluctantly agreed. As they turned to leave, he noticed something he had overlooked before. A small object half buried at the base of the stone column. Bending down, he carefully extracted it from the soft earth. It was a child's shoe, small enough to have belonged to a 6 or 7-year-old. Despite showing signs of exposure to the elements, it was remarkably preserved, the leather still supple, the laces intact. Inside, neatly stamped into the heel, were the initials CH Catherine Harker. The discovery of this tangible link to the missing children lent new urgency to Blackwood's investigation. Returning to Woodbury, he showed the shoe to Mrs. Miller, who confirmed that it matched her memory of the footwear worn by the Harker children on Sundays. More significantly, she recalled that Dr. Miller had once mentioned that all the Harker children had their initials stamped inside their shoes and boots, a practical measure in a household with 7 young ones. Blackwood spent the remainder of his time in Calhoun County gathering additional information about the Harker family and the history of the forest where he had found the stone circle. From county records, he learned that the land had never been successfully settled prior to Thomas Harker's purchase. Though several attempts had been made, each previous owner had either abandoned the property or met with some misfortune that prevented them from establishing a successful homestead. From older residents and descendants of the region's original Native American inhabitants, Blackwood collected folktales and legends about the woods. These stories, though varying in details, shared common elements. The forest was considered a place where time behaved strangely, where people occasionally vanished, and where peculiar lights and sounds had been reported for generations. Most intriguing was an account from an elderly Cherokee woman living on the outskirts of the county. Speaking through an interpreter, she told of an ancient belief that certain places served as gateways between the world of the living and other realms. The forest near Whispering Creek, she said, had been one such gateway, a place where a powerful entity dwelled, one that fed on human life essence, particularly the vibrant energy of the young. "It offers a bargain," the woman said, her wrinkled hands moving expressively as she spoke. "Long life, freedom from illness, gifts beyond imagining. But the price is always more than what appears. It takes your years but leaves you breathing. It takes your future but leaves you present. It is patient and hungry, always hungry." When Blackwood asked if there was a way to free someone claimed by this entity, the old woman shook her head sadly. "Once taken, always taken. They become part of it, feeding it, serving it. Only when it tires of them and consumes them completely are they truly gone." Armed with this folkloric context and his own observations, Professor Blackwood developed a theory that synthesized scientific principles with the supernatural elements he could neither dismiss nor fully explain. He believed that the stone circle represented a focal point of unusual natural forces, perhaps magnetic or electrical in nature, that had been harnessed by ancient peoples and later inadvertently accessed by the Harker family. The professor's notes suggested that Thomas and Eleanor Harker might have stumbled upon the circle during their first years on the property, perhaps made some form of contact with whatever force resided there, and unwittingly exposed their children to its influence. The gradual behavioral changes in the children noted by Eleanor before their disappearance indicated a progressive effect rather than a sudden transformation. Blackwood speculated that the family's final disappearance had come when this process reached its culmination, the parents perhaps realizing too late what was happening and attempting to intervene, only to be claimed themselves by the forest entity. As for the children's apparent agelessness and continued semi-existence, Blackwood proposed a theory that would have seemed fantastical had it not been supported by multiple credible witness accounts. The entity had somehow extracted or suspended the natural aging process of the children, preserving them in a state between life and death for purposes unknown. Before leaving Calhoun County, Blackwood revisited the stone circle, this time alone despite Moses's warnings. He spent several hours documenting the site in detail, taking measurements and collecting additional specimens. As twilight approached, he reluctantly prepared to depart, aware that navigating the forest in darkness would be dangerous. It was then that he had his own encounter with the Harker children. They emerged from between the trees as the light faded, 7 small figures moving with that same unnatural grace described by Dr. Miller. They formed a semicircle around the stone column, regarding Blackwood with solemn, unblinking eyes. Unlike the doctor, Blackwood had come prepared for this possibility. He maintained his composure, greeting the children by name based on descriptions he had gathered. William, Mary, Martha, James, Catherine, Thomas, Elizabeth, he said, keeping his voice steady. "I've been looking for you." "We know," replied William, still appearing 12 years old, though 2 decades had passed since his birth. "You've been asking questions about us in the town." "I seek to understand what happened to you," Blackwood said, "perhaps to help if help is possible." A sound like whispered laughter came from the children, though their expressions remained unnaturally still. "We don't need help," said one of the twins, Martha. Blackwood guessed from the small birthmark visible behind her right ear. "We're perfectly fine as we are." "You don't age," Blackwood observed. "You don't breathe. You exist in a state between life and death. Surely that is not what your parents wanted for you." At the mention of their parents, something flickered across the children's faces. A momentary expression that might have been sadness or anger, quickly suppressed. "Our parents made a choice," said James, his child's voice incongruous with the ancient weariness in his eyes. "They chose for us and then they chose again. They went deeper into the forest." "What do you mean?" pressed Blackwood. "What choice did they make?" Catherine stepped forward, and Blackwood noticed she was barefoot on her right foot. He held up the shoe he had found. "I believe this belongs to you, Catherine." The girl nodded, taking the shoe and slipping it onto her foot with deliberate movements. "Father came here first," she said, her voice soft but carrying clearly in the still air of the circle. "He was lost hunting, and it found him. It offered him prosperity, healthy children, freedom from the sicknesses that had taken his brothers and sisters in Charleston. All he had to do," continued Thomas Jr., "was bring his family to live on this land, near enough for it to taste us little by little. Father didn't understand the true bargain," added little Elizabeth, her golden curls catching the last rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. "Not until Mother began to notice how we were changing." "And then?" prompted Blackwood, scribbling hastily in his notebook. "Then they tried to take us away," William said. "They packed our belongings in the night, planning to flee before dawn, but we already belonged to the forest by then. We led them here instead." "What happened to them?" Blackwood asked, though he feared he knew the answer. All 7 children pointed simultaneously toward the stone column. "They're part of it now," they said in unison. "As we will be eventually, as you could be if you wished." Blackwood felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What do you mean?" "It's always hungry for new vessels, new carriers of its influence," explained William. "That's why we appear to people, why we watch and wait, and sometimes call to them. We are its lures, its voices in the world of men." "And it has noticed you, Professor," said Martha with a small, terrible smile. "Defines your curiosity appetizing." "Join us," urged Mary, extending a small pale hand. "Stay with us in the woods. No more aging, no more illness, no more death. Only endless time to pursue your studies, to learn secrets no living man has ever known." Blackwood felt a powerful compulsion to step forward, to take the offered hand. The prospect was tantalizing. Immortality, unlimited knowledge, mysteries beyond imagining. For a moment, he wavered, his scientific curiosity nearly overwhelming his sense of self-preservation. It was the sight of Catherine adjusting her recovered shoe that broke the spell. The simple childish gesture reminded him forcefully that these were not truly children anymore, but something else wearing the semblance of children, frozen, unchanging, bound to an entity they themselves had described as hungry. "I thank you for the offer," he said carefully, taking a step back toward the path would lead him out of the forest. "But I must decline. My work requires that I remain in the world of the living." The children's expressions hardened simultaneously, their eyes growing cold. "It doesn't make this offer twice," said William, his voice now layered with other tones, deeper voices speaking in concert with his childish one. "No one refuses and simply walks away. Nevertheless, that is what I intend to do," replied Blackwood, continuing to back toward the path while maintaining eye contact with the children. "I wish you peace and perhaps someday release." The children began to move toward him, their movements no longer graceful but jerky and insectal, like puppets controlled by unskilled hands. Their faces remained expressionless, but their eyes had begun to glow with a faint bluish light, similar to the mysterious illumination reported by Deputy Green years earlier. Blackwood turned and ran, abandoning dignity for speed. Behind him came the sound of small feet in pursuit, accompanied by a high, thin singing that seemed to come from all directions at once, a wordless melody that made his skin crawl and his thoughts grow sluggish. He stumbled along the path, branches whipping at his face, roots threatening to trip him at every step. The forest seemed to close in around him, paths that had been clear earlier now choked with undergrowth, landmarks he had noted on his way in now absent or changed. Just as despair began to overwhelm him, Blackwood burst from the tree lean at the edge of what had been the Harker property. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit ceased abruptly. Turning, he saw the 7 children standing at the forest's edge, their glowing eyes regarding him impassively. "We'll be waiting," called William, his voice once again that of a normal child. "When your curiosity overcomes your fear, we'll be waiting." With that, the children turned as one and walked back into the forest, disappearing among the shadows beneath the ancient oaks. Blackwood wasted no time in returning to Woodbury, packing his belongings, and departing Calhoun County the following morning. Over the subsequent months, he organized his notes and specimens, preparing a monograph on what he termed the Whispering Creek anomaly. But as he worked, a persistent cough developed, followed by night sweats and a general decline in his once robust health. Doctors in Atlanta diagnosed consumption and prescribed the usual remedies, none of which produced improvement. By the winter of 1878, Thaddeus Blackwood was confined to his bed at Emory College, his ambitious scholarly work unfinished. In his final days, attended by colleagues and students, Blackwood spoke often of the Harker children, sometimes addressing them as if they were present in his room. On the night of his death, a young medical student sitting with him reported that the professor suddenly sat upright, staring toward the window with an expression of mingled wonder and horror. "They've come for me after all," Blackwood whispered. 7 unchanged faces, 7 Unaged forms. "I should have known. Curiosity was ever my downfall." Those were his last coherent words. He died before dawn, his unfinished manuscript and collected specimens becoming part of Emory College's archived collections, largely forgotten as academic interests shifted toward more practical matters in the industrializing New South. The story of the Harker family might have ended there, consigned to local legend and scholarly footnotes, had it not been for a series of incidents in the early years of the 20th century that brought renewed attention to the old mystery. In 1905, construction began on a railway line that would pass within a mile of the former Harker property, by then long absorbed back into county lands due to unpaid taxes. The surveyors and work crews reported peculiar occurrences from the outset, tools going missing only to reappear in different locations, unexplained sounds at night, and, most disturbing, the repeated sighting of children watching from the edge of the forest. The foreman, John Garrett, documented these events in his daily logs, attributing them to pranks by local children or the superstitious fears of his workers, many of whom were recent immigrants unfamiliar with the area. But as the rail line progressed closer to Whispering Creek, the incidents escalated in both frequency and strangeness. Workers began to fall ill with symptoms similar to those that had afflicted Professor Blackwood, persistent coughs, night sweats, and rapid deterioration of health. Within a month, 3 men had died, and a dozen more had abandoned their jobs, citing fear of the sickness or claiming to have been visited in the night by children with old eyes. The project fell behind schedule, costs mounted, and eventually, the railway company decided to reroute the line several miles to the south, citing engineering difficulties with the original path. The official reports made no mention of the strange occurrences, but correspondence between company executives and the project engineers referenced the Harker matter and the wisdom of avoiding disturbance to certain areas best left undisturbed. Public interest in the Harker mystery flared briefly following the railway incident, with several Atlanta newspapers publishing sensationalized accounts of the ghost children of Calhoun County and the ageless ones of Whispering Creek. These articles, while largely speculative and embellished for dramatic effect, did include some accurate historical details drawn from county records and interviews with elderly residents who remembered the original disappearance. This publicity brought the case to the attention of Dr. Elainer Vandergraaf, a researcher with the newly established American Society for Psychical Research. Dr. Vandergraaf had made a name for herself investigating purported hauntings and other paranormal phenomena throughout the eastern United States, applying scientific methods to separate genuine anomalies from hoaxes and misinterpretations of natural events. In the spring of 1906, Dr. Vandergraaf traveled to Georgia to conduct her own investigation of the Harker case. Unlike previous investigators, she came equipped with then-modern devices for measuring environmental conditions, thermometers, barometers, an early electromagnetic field detector, and a camera specially modified for low-light photography. Dr. Vandergraaf's approach was methodical. She began by examining all available historical records, including Professor Blackwood's unfinished manuscript and specimens, which she obtained permission to study at Emory College. She interviewed surviving witnesses of previous incidents, though by 1906 these were few and very elderly. She visited the former Harker property, now completely reclaimed by nature, with only the stone chimney still standing as evidence of human habitation. Most significantly, she ventured into the forest beyond Whispering Creek, seeking the stone circle described by Blackwood. She found it much as he had nearly 30 years earlier, though now the trees surrounding it had grown even larger, their interlacing branches now completely blocking the sky above the circle. Setting up her instruments around the perimeter of the circle, Dr. Vandergraaf documented several anomalies over the course of 3 days and nights of observation. Temperature within the circle was consistently 6 to 8 degrees cooler than the surrounding forest, regardless of time of day or weather conditions. Compass needles behaved erratically near the central stone column, sometimes spinning freely, other times pointing fixedly toward the column regardless of position. Barometric pressure fluctuated wildly within the circle, dropping precipitously at sunset and dawn without corresponding changes in the wider environment. Photographic plates exposed within the circle developed with unusual distortions, spiral patterns of light, translucent human-shaped figures, and, in one remarkable instance, what appeared to be 7 distinct child-sized silhouettes arranged around the central stone. On her final night of observation, Dr. Vandergraaf had her own encounter with what she objectively termed the Harker manifestation. In her detailed field notes, later published in the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research, she described how the 7 children appeared at midnight, emerging from the forest just as the temperature in the circle dropped to near freezing despite the mild spring night. Unlike previous witnesses, Dr. Vandergraaf had prepared a series of scientific tests to determine the nature of the manifestations. She had brought objects associated with the original Harker family, a page from Thomas Harker's ledger found in county records, a ribbon that had belonged to Elainer Harker, preserved by a former neighbor, as well as control items with no connection to the family. The children reacted strongly to the familial objects, gathering around them with expressions Dr. Vandergraaf described as hungry. When she placed the ribbon on the central stone, the girl she identified as Elizabeth, based on previous descriptions, reached for it with trembling eagerness, only to withdraw her hand at the last moment with a look of frustration. Most revealing was the children's response to direct questioning. Dr. Vandergraaf had prepared a systematic interview protocol, beginning with simple identification questions and progressing to more complex inquiries about their nature and condition. The children identified themselves as the Harkas, answering to their names as documented in historical records. They confirmed they did not age and described themselves as bound to the forest entity, which they consistently referred to as it or the Hungry One. When asked if they were alive or dead, they responded in unison, "Neither and both. We breathe but do not live. We exist but do not grow. We are its vessels until it consumes us entirely." Dr. Vandergraaf asked if they wished to be released from this state, a question previous investigators had not directly posed. The response was unexpected. The children appeared to disagree with each other, some nodding, others shaking their heads. William, seemingly still their leader, finally spoke for the group. "We have been as we are for so long," he said, his voice betraying emotion for the first time. "We remember little of what came before. Release would mean true death now, true ending. Some of us fear that more than our endless waiting. But you suffer," Dr. Vandergraaf observed. "We hunger," corrected Martha, "as it hungers always and endlessly." "For what?" pressed the doctor. "For life," said Mary, "for growth and change and the passage of years. For what was taken from us and what we now take from others when we can." This exchange was interrupted by a sudden wind that swept through the circle, extinguishing Dr. Vandergraaf's lanterns and scattering her papers. In the darkness, she felt small. Cold hands touch her face, her wrists, her throat, gentle at first, then increasingly urgent, grasping. "Join us," whispered multiple voices in her ear. "Give us your warmth, your years. Feel what we feel. Know what we know." Dr. Vandergraaf, by her own admission, came closer to yielding than she cared to acknowledge. The pull was tremendous, a promise of knowledge beyond mortal understanding, of mysteries solved and secrets revealed. Only her rigorous scientific training and perhaps her own stubborn nature allowed her to resist. Breaking free of the ghostly hands, she stumbled to the edge of the circle, fumbling with matches to relight a single lantern. In its weak glow, she saw the children had arranged themselves around the central stone, their hands linked, their faces turned upward toward the canopy of trees. From their open mouths came that same high, thin singing reported by Professor Blackwood, a melody that seemed to make the air itself vibrate in sympathy. The stone column began to glow with a faint bluish light that pulsed in rhythm with the children's song. As the light grew stronger, Dr. Vandergraaf observed what she described as a thinning of the very fabric of reality above. The stone, a distortion in the air similar to heat waves rising from sun-baked earth, but moving in spiral patterns that made her eyes water and her mind reel when she attempted to follow them. Through this distortion, she glimpsed what appeared to be another landscape entirely. Not the night-dark forest of Georgia, but a gray plain stretching to a horizon where multiple moons of various sizes hung in a starless sky. Moving across this plain were tall, thin figures that seemed to be composed more of shadow than substance, their proportions wrong for human beings, their movements jerky and insectal like those of the children when agitated. One of these figures paused, appearing to turn toward the opening between worlds. Dr. Vandergraaf had the distinct impression it had become aware of her observation. A sense of ancient, alien hunger washed over her, so powerful she fell to her knees, gasping for breath. The children's song rose to a crescendo, and the distortion began to widen, the boundary between worlds growing thinner still. Dr. Vandergraaf, realizing the danger, gathered her remaining strength and fled the circle, abandoning her equipment in favor of speed. Behind her, the singing changed to laughter, not the innocent laughter of children, but something older and crueler, filled with the knowledge of centuries and the patience of entities that measured time by the rise and fall of civilizations rather than the brief span of human lives. Dr. Vandergraaf made her way back to Woodbury, collected her remaining belongings, and departed Georgia the following day. Unlike her predecessors, she survived to document her experiences, though she noted in her journal that she frequently dreamed of 7 children standing at the foot of her bed, watching her with hungry eyes, inviting her to join them in the woods. Her formal paper on the Harker case, published in 1907, proposed a theory that synthesized the observations made by Dr. Miller, Professor Blackwood, and herself. She suggested that the stone circle was indeed a gateway between dimensions, one that had been deliberately sealed in the distant past but was gradually weakening, allowing increasing interaction between our world and whatever lay beyond. The Harker children, in her assessment, had been transformed into servitors of the entity she called the extra-dimensional intelligence, neither fully alive nor truly dead, but existing in a state that partook of both conditions. Their apparent agelessness was a result of being partially removed from the normal flow of time in our dimension, while their continued physical presence, able to be seen, heard, and occasionally touched, indicated they remained tethered to our reality. Dr. Vandergraaf speculated that the entity's ultimate goal was to widen the gateway sufficiently to enter our world completely, using the children as both anchors and lures to attract potential new servants or sacrifices. She recommended that the entire area be cordoned off and placed under observation, though she acknowledged the practical difficulties of monitoring such a remote location indefinitely. Her recommendations were partially implemented. The Calhoun County authorities posted warnings around the perimeter of what had been the Harker property, prohibiting entry due to dangerous natural conditions. The stone circle itself was not disturbed, as Dr. Vandergraaf had cautioned that attempting to destroy the gateway might have unpredictable and potentially catastrophic consequences. For several decades, the area remained isolated, visited only by occasional thrill-seekers or paranormal enthusiasts drawn by the persistent legends. Reports of encounters with the Harker children continued, though less frequently than in previous years. Those who claimed to have seen them described them exactly as they had been in 1857. 7 children, Unaged, unaltered by the passage of time, watching from the edge of the forest with hungry, patient eyes. The Great Depression and World War II turned public attention to more immediate concerns, and the Harker mystery faded from popular awareness. By the mid-20th century, the story had become just another Southern Gothic tale, told around campfires to frighten children or shared as local color with visitors to the region. This changed in 1972 when development began on a residential subdivision that would encompass part of the former Harker property. The original warnings had been forgotten or ignored, the land having passed through various owners over the decades before being purchased by Sunnyvale Development Corporation for conversion into a planned community of single-family homes. Initial land clearing proceeded without incident, the abandoned ruins of the Harker house long since completely reclaimed by nature. But when bulldozers approached the area near Whispering Creek, unusual equipment failures began to occur. Engines stalled inexplicably, electrical systems shorted out, hydraulic lines burst despite recent inspections showing no defects. Workers reported feeling suddenly ill while operating in certain areas, developing symptoms ranging from dizziness and nausea to more serious conditions requiring hospitalization. Several mentioned seeing children watching from the treeline, though no children should have been present on the active construction site. The project foreman, Michael Collins, began keeping a log of these incidents, noticing they clustered in areas approaching the forest beyond the creek. Researching county records during a weather-related work stoppage, he discovered the old reports related to the Harker disappearance and subsequent investigations. Collins brought his concerns to the project managers, who initially dismissed them as superstitious nonsense. But as delays mounted and costs increased due to equipment damage and worker absenteeism, the development company became more receptive to Beyond the Creek. Researching county records during a weather-related work stoppage, he discovered the old reports related to the Harker disappearance and subsequent investigations. Collins brought his concerns to the project managers, who initially dismissed them as superstitious nonsense. But as delays mounted and costs increased due to equipment damage and worker absenteeism, the development company became more receptive to alternative risks to workers and eventually to residents if development proceeded as planned. She recommended preserving the forest and creek as a natural conservation area within the subdivision plan, establishing a minimum buffer zone of 1 mile between the stone circle and any residential structures. After considerable internal debate and consultation with legal advisors regarding liability issues, Sunnyvale modified their development plan in accordance with Dr. Chen's recommendations. The forest became the Whispering Creek Nature Preserve, officially protected from development but unofficially avoided by local residents who passed down warnings from generation to generation about the dangers of venturing too deep among those ancient trees. The subdivision itself, ironically named Harker Estates by marketers unaware of the full history behind the name, was completed in 1975 and initially struggled to attract buyers. Stories about the haunted forest at its edge spread quickly, not discouraged by real estate agents who found that certain buyers were actually attracted by the prospect of living near a supposedly supernatural location. Over time, a pattern emerged in the new community. Houses closest to the forest preserve tended to change ownership frequently, their residents reporting sleep disturbances, unexplained illnesses, and sightings of children where no children should be. Those living further from the preserve generally reported no unusual experiences, though many mentioned an inexplicable aversion to the forest that kept them from using the nature trails established around its periphery. Most telling were the experiences of families with young children who moved into homes near the preserve. Parents consistently reported that their children developed imaginary friends who invited them to come play in the special circle in the forest. Several children were found wandering at the forest's edge after disappearing from supposedly secure homes, all telling similar stories of the forever children who wanted to show them where time stops. In 1982, tragedy struck when 10-year-old Emily Watson vanished from her home at the edge of the subdivision. Despite an extensive search involving police, volunteers, and eventually FBI agents specializing in child abductions, no trace of the girl was found until 3 days after her disappearance, when she walked out of the forest, precisely where she had entered it. Emily appeared physically unharmed but was in a state of near catatonia, responding to questions with only a vacant smile. When she finally began to speak again after several weeks of therapy, her account was disturbing. She described meeting children who didn't breathe in the forest, who took her to a special circle with a stone that sings. There, she said, she met the hungry shadow that lives between places, which had tasted her years but found her too small yet to take. Most alarming to her doctors was Emily's conviction that she had been in the forest for years and years, though only 3 days had passed in reality. She described in detail watching seasons change multiple times, seeing trees grow from saplings to giants, and witnessing the stone circle open like a door to show her the gray place where the shadow people live. Emily never fully recovered from her experience, though she eventually returned to school and, by all outward appearances, resumed a normal life. Those close to her noted a fundamental change in her personality. The once outgoing, enthusiastic child became quiet and introspective, given to long periods of staring into space and occasional cryptic statements about when time runs differently and the hunger that never stops. On her 18th birthday, Emily Watson disappeared again. A note left in her bedroom read simply, "They've waited long enough. I'm ready to go back now." Despite another extensive search, she was never found. The Watson case brought renewed attention to the Harker mystery and the stone circle in the forest. Academic researchers from various fields, parapsychology, theoretical physics, cultural anthropology, attempted to conduct investigations, but most found themselves unable to locate the circle despite having precise coordinates from previous studies. Those who did find it rarely stayed long, driven away by equipment failures, sudden illness, or what several described as an overwhelming sense of being watched by something ancient and patient. By the early 21st century, the subdivision had been incorporated into the expanding Atlanta metropolitan area, the forest preserve now an isolated pocket of wilderness surrounded by suburban development. The Harker story had evolved into urban legend status, with multiple versions circulating online and periodic features on paranormal investigation television shows that inevitably captured nothing more compelling than orbs of light and unexplained cold spots. Yet, the encounters continued. Every few years, someone would report seeing 7 children at the forest's edge, children in outdated clothing, unnaturally still, watching with hungry eyes that reflected light like those of nocturnal animals. Occasionally, a child from the surrounding community would go missing, only to return hours or days later with confused memories of forever children and the stone that sings. The most recent documented encounter occurred in 2017, when a team from the Paranormal Research Society of America conducted an overnight investigation in the forest preserve, equipped with infrared cameras, digital audio recorders, and various environmental sensors. Their footage, widely shared online before being abruptly removed from all platforms, showed what appeared to be 7 small figures surrounding their camp at approximately 3:17 a.m. The infrared cameras revealed that these figures generated no body heat, appearing as child-shaped voids against the warmer background of the forest floor. Audio captured during this encounter contained whispering voices, inviting the researchers to join us at the circle and promising knowledge beyond your understanding. Most disturbing was a segment where all 7 figures seemed to speak in unison, saying, "We have waited so long. The door grows wider. Soon it will come through fully, and all times will be one time." The leader of the research team, Dr. Marcus Webb, insisted on continuing the investigation despite this encounter, venturing deeper into the forest the following night in search of the stone circle. The remaining team members, stationed at their base camp, maintained radio contact for approximately 47 minutes after his departure. His final transmission consisted of heavy breathing, followed by words that chilled his colleagues. "I can see it now. The stone, it's glowing. There are children here, but they're not children. Not anymore. And behind them, through the air itself, something is watching me. Something vast. God help me. It's opening." The transmission ended in static. Despite an extensive search by local authorities, Dr. Webb was never found. In the wake of this incident, county officials once again restricted access to the Whispering Creek Nature Preserve, citing environmental concerns and hazardous conditions rather than acknowledging the persistent legends surrounding the area. Security cameras were installed at known entry points, though they frequently malfunction, particularly after dark. And still, residents of the surrounding communities report sightings of 7 children at the forest's edge, eternally young, unnaturally still, watching with patient hunger, as they have for over 160 years. The Harker children, neither fully alive nor truly dead, bound to an entity from beyond our reality, waiting for unwary visitors to venture into their domain. Some nights, when the moon is dark and the wind blows from the direction of the old forest, residents swear they can hear distant singing. High, thin voices performing nursery rhymes in discordant keys that make listeners feel uneasy without knowing why. Parents hold their children closer on such nights, checking locks and drawing curtains against whatever might be watching from the darkness beyond. And somewhere deep in the forest, in a circle of ancient oak trees where sunlight never fully penetrates, 7 children gather around a stone column that occasionally glows with an unearthly blue light. They wait, as they have waited since 1857, neither aging nor dying, breathing but not truly alive, vessels for a hunger that spans dimensions and measures time in centuries rather than years. The mystery of the Harker family remains unsolved, a tale that blurs the boundaries between historical tragedy, supernatural legend, and glimpses of realities beyond our comprehension. All that can be said with certainty is this: in the woods beyond Whispering Creek, 7 children who disappeared in 1857 may still be found by those unfortunate enough to cross their path, unaged, unchanged, and still breathing after all these years.